Hi, I'm Ira Wallace with Southern Exposure Seed Exchange here at Acorn Community Farm, and I'm for the soil because the soil is the basis of our agriculture. Soil grows our plants, and I love good soil.
And that introduction from Ira Wallace with the Southern Exposure Seed Exchange in Louisa County, Virginia. She is an educator, organic gardener and farmer, famed seed saver, and an author. Thank you, Ira, for that kind introduction. And with that, folks, we are off and running on this, our 100th episode of For the Soil, a Conversation. I'm your host, Jeff Ishii. Eric and Mary will join us in just a few moments, but I wanted to quickly remind everyone of how these podcasts are available. First of all, they come out every other Tuesday, year-round, and now this is our 100th episode. The podcast is available on Apple Podcast, on Spotify, Spreaker, SoundCloud, and of course the website forthesoil.org. And we've got a lot to talk about on this, our 100th episode. Stay tuned. Welcome, everyone, to a very special episode of For the Soil, a Conversation. I'm your host, Jeff Ishii, along with my co-host, Eric Benfelt with Virginia Cooperative Extension Community Viability, and Mary Sketch Bryant, Virginia Soil Health Coalition. Guys, we don't have a guest this time to introduce, so this is indeed a special episode. It is our 100th episode of For the Soil, a Conversation. Boy, time flies. That's about all I can say. And I thought it might be appropriate for our listeners who have joined maybe in recent months to kind of reintroduce ourselves. What do we do besides the podcast? And I'll lead off by saying that my name is Jeff Ishii. I'm a farm broadcaster, writer, and journalist. I've been covering Virginia agriculture for 30 years now. And I have a radio program that is syndicated in 12 different states called On the Farm Radio. I was associated with public television for almost 20 years with a television program called Virginia Farming, and just really knee-deep in agricultural communications because that is what I enjoy and that is what I love. And when this podcast came along, it was just a natural fit for me because I love talking with farmers and gardeners and talking about soil health. Mary, what do you do other than the podcast?
Thanks, Jeff. Mary Sketch Bryant, the director of the Virginia Soil Health Coalition, which is embedded at Virginia Tech and Cooperative Extension. And I like to think, I find joy in connecting people and connecting ideas, and soil health is such a perfect realm to do that. So I get to work with organizations and partners across the state that have some connection to soil health. And or I say some connection is I think everything connects to soil health. So it's really fun trying to get creative and identify how through work happening across Virginia and really across the Southeast and the East Coast, can we advance soil health on our landscapes through different partners, through their creative work. I was just at a dinner last night that at the table, we had a data scientist who was in public health. We had a veterinarian. We had a soil scientist and a forest biomaterials expert. And we got talking about soil health. And that's what's so neat about what I get to do. So Eric, I'll turn it to you to hear a little bit about what you do.
Sure. Well, thank you, Jeff and Mary, and it's been a pleasure to work with you all, and then also to have so many guests to hear their stories and have conversations with them. I'm Eric Benfelt. I serve as an extension specialist with Virginia Cooperative Extension, which is a partnership with Virginia Tech and Virginia State University. And I specifically serve as an extension specialist for community viability, but throughout my career, it's really, I think, sort of focusing on agricultural viability, and within that have I think always concentrated on trying how can we help to sustain small and mid-sized farms across Virginia, and within that, I have a specific passion for natural resources, the outdoors, but then also our farm landscape. So soil health relates to so many of those issues, and I think it's foundational to farm profitability as well as sustainability. And then soils, it's I think just such a critical resource when we think about water quality, growing crops or plants, whether it's on the farm or in your garden, and then that is so important also to the Virginia's food system and promotion of health and nutrition overall.
It also seems that it's something that everybody can get behind. I've yet to meet one person who is opposed to soil health or healthy soils. I think we all want healthy soils. And as we mentioned, this is our 100th episode of For the Soil, a conversation. And you know, we call it a conversation because when we got together in the summer of 2021, the three of us, and we kind of talked about our vision, our goals for creating a podcast, I think we were all in agreement that we wanted it to be a conversation. It wouldn't be scripted questions. Is that right, Mary?
Absolutely. I think, with the For the Soil initiative at large, which is this effort to promote the four core principles of soil health and really loop everyone into that. We found that really that human component is so important in the storytelling side. You can get the technical information a lot of places. You can learn the facts, but understanding why different people of different backgrounds value soil and how they're approaching that, we thought there was a lot of potential there. So approaching it as a conversation really has allowed us to get those stories out there.
And Eric, if you could explain to our listeners, of course, we call the podcast For the Soil, a conversation. Explain the significance of the word for, or the digit 4.
Yes, well, it's sort of in some ways, Jeff, and it's a sort of a play on words and two different meanings. And one thing when we've been talking about soil health is how can we find common ground? And the idea for that all of us can be for the soil. And then, as Mary said, in 2012, 2013, our partners, the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service here in Virginia, really started promoting 4 core soil health principles that can help to build and maintain soil health. And that's keeping the soil covered, minimizing soil disturbance, maximizing living roots, and energizing with diversity. And diversity can be different crops, integrating livestock, also diversifying farm enterprises. So those that play on that we can all be for the soil, and then there's 4 core soil health principles that we can all start to build on and promote soil health building practices as well.
It was in October of 2021 that we aired or distributed our very first episode of For the Soil, a conversation. And I'm looking back, guys, now on the list of all of our guests, and I'm not going to start reading them out, but it is virtually a who's who of people involved with farming, with gardening, with soil health, with environmental health, with human health as it relates to soil health. So many very interesting characters. And I thought we'd take just a couple of moments and each of us talk about maybe your favorite couple of episodes. And I'll kick it off by saying that one of our very first guests was one of my very favorite episodes, Dr. John Galbraith, who is on the faculty at Virginia Tech, and he is also the coach of the soil judging team that competes nationally and internationally. And I had no idea about everything that Dr. John Galbraith shared with us on that episode. First of all, he described Pamunkey soils, Pamunkey, Pamunkey soils. I'd never even heard of it before outside of the Native American tribe in southeastern Virginia. But he described Pamunkey as a soil type, how it's a mixture of soils that come from all across Virginia and kind of gather in the James River, and that lower James is what they call pamunky soil, and there's no reason why we shouldn't expect that the world record for corn yield is in southeastern Virginia on pamunky soil. But Dr. John Galbraith was a great guest, and then one of his students. 2 years later, in January of 2023, we had one of his students, a young lady by the name of Claire Talamy. She's a native of Northern Virginia, but she was on one of the teams, the soil judging teams, coached by Dr. John Galbraith, and she ended up being the world champion in soil judging. And she had so many interesting stories to tell. And just again, looking down this list, there's so many names of people that have really done spectacular things when it comes to soil health. Mary, why don't you go next?
Wow, we talked to a lot of people, and how fun that is to get to do, and how every episode has been a learning experience. But I talked about my background and my work really focusing on connections and network building, and so I'm a little biased, but some of my favorite episodes are definitely where some of those unique connections are made. So we relatively recently had Nate Sloan on, who's a chef in Roanoke, and talking about how that food on your plate and the flavor of that food is tied back to the soil. And so something I think really anyone who enjoys good food can understand and grasp. Also, Farmer C, who we had really talking about cultivating wellness from the soil up. She has a real strong wellness perspective. Duran Chavis talking about cultural activism and our social responsibilities and how that ties to the soil. Michael Carter Jr. talking about history, generational wisdom, and the connections to the soil. I think, it just really made me realize how there's so many ways that people come to soil and appreciating it and understanding it and then valuing it and its stewardship to see that diversity and through these human stories. It's wonderful.
Eric, can you share some of your most memorable moments in the first 100 episodes?
Sure, Jeff. As I had mentioned earlier, I think we've always aimed to find common ground as well as build on the idea of think globally, act locally. And some of the international guests that we have, I think starting with Taona Chikwenembe of the Creative Environmental Solutions in Malawi. I appreciated her thoughts on agroforestry and permaculture and connections between soil health and community health and how important that is for individuals as well as families and households. And then we'd also interviewed a guest from Kenya, and then most recently talking with Casper Crabb about his research into how farmers imagine and envision the soil ecosystem, and learning about some of his work in Denmark with market gardeners and community supported agricultural models. I thought that was really interesting, and seeing the commonalities as well as areas where we can learn from others.
I think it's so interesting that I can testify for myself. I have learned a lot. I thought I knew about soil health, and I didn't know nothing about soil health when it comes to people. We've talked from everything from master gardeners in Richmond to people in Africa who are involved in international soil health initiatives. And it's so great just to have an unscripted conversation about what these people are doing. Now let's turn to the future of the podcast, For the Soil, a Conversation. And Mary, I'd love to hear your thoughts about where we go from here.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm excited for the next, hopefully another 100 episodes. Lots of places. I think, some of the same, and then also thinking, where can we bring in new guests that are really helping us learn more? The Virginia Soil Health Coalition is partnering with American Farmland Trust on a Healthy Soils grant program that's providing funding to farmers to try something new on their farms around soil health. So would love to bring some of those folks in to hear, what are you testing out? How's it working? What can other producers learn from what you're trying?
And Eric, how about you for your vision of the future of the podcast?
Well, I think recently we had interviewed Dara Boer and talking to her about youth education and how she's been able to integrate soil health into the classroom, and really have a lot of aha moments. So I think there's continuing to be opportunities of learning from the current generation at the same time, sort of collaborating and encouraging the future generation. I think and then again, really like to have continue to have international guests as well.
Yep. Very well said. And as for myself, I would love us to see us just continue to develop the podcast and increase the number of listeners and also the number of participants. I think there are so many people out there, and let me say at this time, if I may, that for our listeners, if you know of someone who is very involved in soil health and you would like to recommend them to be a guest on the podcast, we would certainly like to hear from you. You can contact us, as always, through the website at forthesoil.org. That is the digit 4, thesoil.org. Just drop us a name and an email or telephone number, whatever contact information you've got. And we're always open to suggestions for guests for the podcast. Well, guys, that about wraps it up. Can you believe it? 100 episodes in the books now. And I think we celebrate this. And of course, we've still got a lot of ground to cover. No pun intended. Well, pun was intended, actually. We've got a lot of ground to cover, and we invite our listeners to return every 2 weeks. The podcast comes out on Tuesday every other week, and we're going to continue that for quite some time in the future. And we are now celebrating our 100th episode. Eric and Mary, thank you so much for what you do, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thank you, Jeff, for the partnership and collaboration.
Thanks, Jeff and Eric.
And a quick reminder, if you would, share the word about our podcast. It comes out every other Tuesday. People can find it on Apple Podcast, on Spotify, Spreaker, SoundCloud, and of course at the website forthesoil.org. We certainly appreciate you listening and you helping us to share the word about the podcast. For the Soil Conversation is made possible with funding support from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and the Agua Fund. Other partners include the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service, Virginia Cooperative Extension, Virginia State University, Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, and partners of the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. Views expressed on this podcast are those of each individual guest. To download a copy of this or any other episode, visit the website forthesoil.org. If you have a specific question about soil health, just call your local extension office, your local USDA service center, or a Soil and Water Conservation District office. Music used during today's program was provided courtesy of the Flip Charts, all rights reserved. For the Soil, a Conversation is produced by On the Farm Radio in collaboration with Virginia Tech. I'm your host, Jeff Ishii.